Welcome to another episode. Today, I'm joined by Jim, who is one of the smartest builders in Interop, a chain abstraction KOL, according to Kaito, and also the founder of Catalyst. So, welcome, Jim.
Thanks for having me, and thanks for the modest and generous intro.
Yeah, I do feel like you're one of the smartest and nicest people in Interop. So, I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Thank you, thank you. I would refute that, but I appreciate it a lot.
Okay. So maybe let's just like set up some context for everyone. Recently, Catalyst announced that you guys are pivoting from the Ethereum ecosystem and going all in on AltVMs, right? So before we go into the details there, maybe give us a quick explanation of like what was your original thesis for Catalyst and how did that go in the early days?
Sure. So we announced our pivot last week. Well, a couple of days ago, but last week of when this recording comes out. Before that, we're still doing similar things. Like honestly, like this isn't a huge shift in what we're doing internally. I think it's just a shift of like how we communicate it. But Catalyst originally it is an AMM, still is an AMM. We're in the process of the migration. And the thesis behind it was basically how do we build a mechanism that is scalable enough to reach kind of this explosion of number of chains that we're going to see, right, or that we predicted to see. And this was a thesis that we had back in 2022. And we've seen it play out more or less for the past 2 years, and we felt pretty confident in the mechanism that we built. It was this AMM where it effectively had like sovereign liquidity pools and different chains, and they could facilitate swaps between each other, right? Using this kind of like novel liquidity primitive that we call unit of liquidity. The issue I think that we saw was that our thesis played out correctly, but the solution, while easy to deploy, was actually quite difficult to basically get buy-in from other participants, other stakeholders to effectively deposit liquidity, right? And so Catalyst can be on main chains; it's deployed on main chains very easily, but it was still the issue of like talking to roll-up teams or talking to other kind of stakeholders who deposit out initial liquidity to facilitate the swaps, and that proved to be quite difficult. And so we basically took the mechanism that we had, we swapped out the AMM piece, we're adding in a more intent-based mechanism. And with that, we were basically revisiting what we wanted to focus on, right? And so we have this mechanism. It's kind of like good for everything, right? Which means it's probably good for nothing. It was good for EVM. It was good for SVM. It was good for Move, et cetera, et cetera. And we realized that if we were to actually do away with some of the optimizations that we had for EVM and actually double down on kind of like the idiosyncrasies of other AltVMs, we can make it actually more performant, right? And so it kind of came down to a really tough decision. We were like, okay, do we want to do everything for everyone, which is kind of the tagline of every interop slash chain abstraction product right now, or do we want to be far more opinionated? And I felt pretty strongly that the latter made a lot more sense. And so that was kind of the like more technical underpinning or the internal underpinning of like why we announced our move to be 100% on AltVMs.
Got it. So I think a few key points for me. I feel, we've been in touch talking about your initial launch for a long time, right? So as I understood it, you guys always planned to be scalable and you built the product in such a way. So it was never about the EVM. You guys always wanted to be on different VMs, right? But
Yeah.
what you're saying now is that the problem in the early days was actually just getting liquidity on some of the chains you added, right? And you could not get buy-in in terms of liquidity and then also adoption. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. Well, I would say it's there's kind of three pieces to it, right? Like the first piece is when you look at the AMM mechanism, that was kind of the trouble that we had, right? The second piece is what I kind of outlined last week in my blog post, was that we were kind of we went on this kind of research path of asking builders and cross-chain users what they wanted, and we landed on going 100% on AltVMs. And then the last piece is that by swapping out the AMM and adding in an intent-based mechanism, we actually were able to achieve our goals a lot easier, right? It became a lot more streamlined. Like this implementation is, I think, almost an order of magnitude smaller than the AMM because it doesn't contain all of that logic, right? And so it was that piece. And then also it becomes a lot faster and cheaper because we're able to do batch verifications, right? The AMM, at least the initial implementation that we had future plans to improve it, was kind of message by or transaction by transaction verification. So every time you did a swap, it came with it one message via wormhole or layer 0, et cetera, right? And so there incurs kind of a fixed gas cost. And so if we were able to batch it, we can amortize that across many transactions, basically the cross thesis, and that made it a lot cheaper.
Got it. So it's also not just the AltVM switch, it's also the switch from AMM to Intense Heavy now. Is this like a development over the last year or so, maybe? Because I feel like until beginning of this year, Intense were good, but they didn't have that sort of like mindshare adoption buy-in. But now every bridge that's launching today kind of always does the intent-based design in one way or another.
Yeah, yeah, I would say it's definitely like a mechanism that has had its ripple effects throughout like every interop player, basically, less like Stargate, effectively.
Mhm. Okay. And then what would you say was like the tipping point where you were like, okay, this is not working out clearly because we're not getting the results that we had initially imagined. And then how did you kind of explain it to your team, onboarded them to this new thesis, and what was like the buy-in from them?
Sure. So I guess the tipping point was maybe like two pieces. I think the first piece was us being like really intellectually honest and like seeing the AMM perform in the wild. And, it would be, I would say, as performant in terms of price as other like bridge solutions, but it would be much slower. And so if we were to stack rank it, in a hypothetical like list that is displayed on the jumper UI, it would probably be like fourth or fifth, right? If not even less. And so we didn't feel confident doing aggregator integrations because we knew that we weren't going to be able to win routes anyway, right? And so that was a bit of like research, drawing from data and being like intellectually honest. And then the second piece was around kind of just like general macro shifts, where I think intents were kind of a buzzword that was being thrown out last year. I think when you add in the idea of like intents with solvers, with chain abstraction, with you know settlement or rebalancing via liquidity, like what across V3 kind of was articulating their framework, or to a certain extent what the Cake framework from Frontier Research kind of came out with. I think it started to make a lot more sense. Where for me, like if you were actually to like take the job to be done, right, of like a cross-chain AMM, you broke it out into three separate pieces. You have like the actual expression of intent, you have the fulfillment by a filler/solver, and you have some sort of like rebalancing. You can effectively modularize it and like optimize on like all three of those different layers, right? And I don't think without kind of the thought leadership of Hart and of Stefan at Frontier, would I have been able to like see the bull case for it effectively. So I credit them for sure.
Mhm. Okay. I mean, that makes sense, right? Like the intent-based design definitely has merits. It also has trade-offs, and the AMM camp would be loud about that. But there is adoption, right? Because fast and cheap have always been properties that are desired by users. The challenge has always been to how do you do this in a decentralized kind of manner, right?
Yeah.
But like I kind of want to ask you about the personal toll that it would take through this process, right? Because you never like to realize that okay, you might have been wrong early on, and then as a founder, like how do you go back to your team and say that hey, we might have made a mistake in the early days, it's still not too late, let's switch direction and then go all in on like this new path.
Yeah. So quickly before I talk about that, I think I'm like super grateful from all the feedback and like reception that people gave last week of like me kind of like sharing this journey. It's not something that I initially felt very comfortable sharing. I had a very different initial draft of announcing the pivot around like, oh, like, you know, I just knew alt VMs are the best, right? Like I went onto the movement Discord, I said good move, and I'm just super pilled, right? Um, that just felt very disingenuous to me. I think comes across as like, oh, of course, like Jim is super smart, like full confidence, but it just didn't feel like the right story for me, and I didn't want to be like dishonest. And so, got buy-in from my team to tell a more honest story, got buy-in from my investors, and I'm really glad that it kind of resonated. Um, so going back to the team piece, I think the framing that every early stage project should take is that we're kind of assembling a team to be as like agile as possible. And the way that I want to frame it is like we have a general thesis or general like subject matter that we're A, excited about, and B, feel quite competent in. And we're just going to take as many shots on goal as possible, right? And if one shot on goal like misses or gets blocked by the keeper, like we're just going to have to like recalibrate and take as many shots as possible based on the team that we assembled, the burn, the mandate, et cetera, right? And that's actually not my initial like way of framing things, right? When we are hiring people for the team to build Catalyst, the pitch was very much like product centric. It's like we're building this AMM, we're building the unit of liquidity, we're building for this world. And I would say 80% of our team is engineers, and so they were really pilled on this product led kind of pitch. And so changing mindsets to be a lot more agile to this like framing that I mentioned earlier was pretty difficult, honestly. But we got through it, right? And I think that's a huge learning for me going forward is that things change, right? You have to be comfortable with being very frank about the data and about the feedback that you're receiving and take action on that, or else you're just going to be stagnating, and that's not what people have bet on me with their careers for, right?
Yeah, I think you've put it really well. Also in an analogy that I understand really well, so maybe that's why I'm appreciating
I
it.
should have done a cricket one.
No, like you're absolutely right in saying that you have to take more shots to even have a chance of scoring, right? And I feel like a lot of founders can probably take inspiration from what you've gone through and what you just explained, because a lot of companies in crypto are startups. Like we don't realize this in our day-to-day lives, but then how many teams have actually been here longer than a year or 2 years or 3 years, right? Everyone is a startup, and then you have to have this mindset because crypto is changing quickly at all times. So you never know when such an innovation comes up where your product has to face the same thing. So I feel like a lot of people would relate to this problem.
Yeah, and I'm glad, and I wanted to be like upfront about it, right? I actually got a little bit of feedback that, like it's not, from other like founders or for people in crypto, it's like was in their opinion not the right thing to do. It's like don't ever be vulnerable. You are the champion of your brand. Like people depend on you, and I would say like that works for some people. It's not who I want to be, and it's not the mark that I want to leave in the community.
Yeah, I mean you're honest to yourself, so that's good. But moving on to like the alt VM thesis, right? I feel like people know alt VMs right now as Solana, maybe. But then I read your blog post and you were talking about movement labs and also how you were in the super team Discord. So maybe help us understand what the alt VM ecosystem kind of looks like today, right? There's Solana, there's movement. What else is there, and uh, what makes you excited about it right now?
Yeah. So I'll answer your landscape question first. So I would say there's probably like three big camps of AltVMs right now. First one is Solana. Of course, that's like you know top chain AltVM chain on a number of metrics. Um, and there are a number of like modular projects that are also using the SVM virtual machine and execution environment, namely like Eclipse and Soon. And there are a few others that are being announced as well. And so working with them is really cool. I like what Solana's doing a lot. I think they've been very opinionated and they've believed very strongly on their thesis of monolithic building or a singleton state machine, and it's played out like very very well, and also like decreasing hardware costs, making it even more accessible to run a Solana node. I like what Eclipse is doing as well because they're also taking the same kind of principles of the SVM and they're adding like AS on top of it, right? So great ways for applications to monetize application specific sequencing for folks not familiar and just thought I was saying a swear word. So that's the SVM camp, right? The second camp, and I think it's really kind of on the rise of the past 6 months or so, is the Move VM chains. And so Aptos, Sui, I think they're doing pretty well. Honestly, I've played dozens of hours in those ecosystems, and I've been pretty impressed with kind of the UX behind it. They thought a lot about what native account abstraction looks like, what a lot safer kind of mechanisms for token creation and distribution looks like, and of course, movement. Right, movement is something that I'm super involved in, that we're super involved in as a team. I talk to the movement team all the time. I really like what they're doing with kind of the combination of using Move as a developer-friendly language, as well as the sequencer for fast finality. I think it's just going to be a step function change in developing apps. And then the last piece is kind of a longer tail of execution environments that are kind of experimenting with a number of different functionalities. A lot of them are WASM, or a lot of them use like RISC-V. So namely like Cartesi, using kind of like a Linux OS primitive, Fuel, which has built their own VM from scratch to be hyper performant and to have predicates and other kind of like intent expressing mechanisms. There's Fluent, which is using a blended execution, so you can have WASM, you can have EVM, you have SVM, and so taking bits and pieces is really cool, right? The optimizations of using Rust with the security of the kind of asset account object mechanisms or methods rather of Move, but then the readability of Solidity. So that becomes very interesting. I'm sorry to do the service by bucking into kind of the catch-all bucket, but I didn't find really a common thread between them outside of that.
So I think it's fair in the sense that you've kind of bucketed the VMs based on adoption, right? I feel like Solana has now established itself. At Li.F, we were also in this position when we were kind of prioritizing Solana, and then very few bridges actually supported it. And an interesting fact about Solana, like I was just checking the data today, and like in the past 30 days, Ethereum to Solana has been one of our most popular routes. So I'm still surprised that more bridges do not support it, right? Like there's clearly order flow moving from EVM chains and to Solana, right?
Yeah.
And then of course there's the Eclipse team that's building. So all of that work will come in handy in supporting those chains as well. With Move, like you explained, Aptos and Sui have shown adoption. And then there's exciting potential coming up with like movement labs. And then even in my mental model, I would put in everything else in the other bucket, because there's a lot of theory, but maybe we haven't seen anything live right now. So we don't know how to like pick and choose some of the ones that stand out in the crowd.
Yeah, but that's like something that I love about like that latter bucket is like they're kind of in the frontier experimenting. And I think when you experiment and you take big swings or like more shots on goal, like to use the previous analogy, you're going to be able to attract like outlier apps that are able to really move the needle in terms of adoption and experience.
Got it. So in terms of like just order flow on all of these chains, right? Like right now, Solana has established itself, so there's order flow. But then among all of the other AltVMs and EVM to all of these AltVMs, there's not much order flow. So are you kind of taking a bet on this order flow increasing in the next 1 to 2 years? Because right now that market is small.
Yeah, so it's a small market. Well, it depends on how you view it, right? So I would say like it's a smaller market than probably EVM volumes right now. But if you look at like the growth over the past 12 months, it's definitely increasing and gaining share of like total percentage of market, right? I would say if you zoom out even more, and you include kind of non-VM chains or like chains that probably aren't even in kind of the AltVM bucket, like Bitcoin and like Tron and Stellar, that has huge volume, right? And huge opportunity. And there's really no one touching that right now. I'm even like sad that I admitted that to the public. But that's like an opportunity that has a lot of off-chain volume right now that is very easily can be brought on-chain. And so when you look at even like Bitcoin, right, not even including like Tron and Stellar, like Bitcoin does more volume from Bitcoin ETH using like Thorchain Chainflip than all the EVM bridging volume combined, right? So you add up Orbiter and Across and Stargate and CCTP, the combined volume of Thorchain Chainflip is still greater than that just for Bitcoin, right? Not even talking about like Solana or anything. So it's a really big potential, and I think it's quite frankly pretty underserved right now, and we're pretty well positioned to take advantage of that. But then, yes, to your point, like on the other ones, it is a bet. Like we're seeing, and the bet is not so much that we think these are like growing markets and we want to take advantage of them. The bet is that we think that the design space that they've opened up will lead to a lot more kind of 10x applications. And at the end of the day, like people want to go to new chains to use new apps, right? And we want to be well positioned to take advantage of that when that happens, right? And so we're building a TON bridge right now. Should have added that to the previous AltVM bucketing. People want to be on TON. They want to play Catison. They want to play Hamster Combat. And getting access to tokens on TON is tough, right? And TON is definitely I think a really great breeding ground for future kind of token launches, meme coin launches, et cetera, right? Why is the Solana volume so great? It's because people want to go in Solana to use or bet on meme coins or what have you, right? And so that's the bet. And then for movement and for move chains, there's a lot of really awesome stuff happening on the consumer side and honestly on the dependent side as well. And so we're making a bet that people want to be there, and we're just the infrastructure that's going to supply that, right? That's our framing. We're not we're not going to market and we're saying that we're the best bridge because blah blah blah. Like we're fast, we're intent based, et cetera, et cetera. What we're selling is the access to things that people actually want to go to, which is apps like Catison and meme coins.
Yeah, I think when you were doing like some of the market research, I feel like I gave you some feedback around people just want to make money and they just want access to financial opportunities, right? So if the meta is shifting to some of these alt VMs in the future, and like you said, Ton has games, maybe Movement will have some sort of like meme coin culture or some app that everyone wants to try and people can make money off of it, they would need access, right? And right now, how the bridging landscape is shaped, everyone kind of just starts on the EVM, and then even adding Solana is a market that only 3 or 4 bridges kind of serve. So I feel like by being early, you can also just capture a lot of that market. And like you're saying, you don't want to sell the fact that okay, we have the best bridge in the market. We give users what they want, which is access to new chains and just like making money on it, just enjoying a new game.
Yeah. Well, we have the best bridge in the market for AltVMs, right? It's like optimized around all the idiosyncrasies that we see for these new VMs. We're just not going to say it that way, right? Because people don't care at the end of the day. They care that they want to go somewhere.
I mean, that makes sense. Like, yeah, exactly. So, what do you think you guys would do different this time in terms of your go-to-market strategy? Like, how would you capture mind share in the alt-VM ecosystem? Because, frankly, one of the challenges for us going from EVM to alt-VMs was just becoming part of that ecosystem, right? Like, everyone in the EVM ecosystem by year 2 kind of knew about our company, our project, right? But then when you're starting in a new ecosystem altogether, you have to make new friends and then you have to get new type of audiences on socials and everywhere. So that's a really hard problem that maybe projects realize later, like we also realized it later. So what are your plans this time?
So I think the really good thing about alt VMs, all of them, right? Like Solana, Eclipse, Soon, Movement, Aptos, Sui, Blend, Fluent. I always say Blend. Ton, is that because they are smaller than Ethereum, they're much friendlier. Is like the reality of it, right? And so they're much more generous with their time, and they have a lot of compassion and empathy for builders that are building on them, right? And so I've had the pleasure of like speaking to the teams of like all of these chains that I've mentioned, and they've been beyond helpful, far more than I think the role of teams that I've interacted with the notable exception of Optimism. I think they're a great team. And so that was really helpful, right? It's like you build those relationships, you actually feel welcome, and you get kind of ingratiated into the communities that are also quite welcoming and quite excited. And it makes it easy, right? It makes it easy to go out and like be a champion for them and kind of like hold hands side by side. And that's just a great feeling. I said it in my blog post, and I'll stand by it. Like there's just more of a positive sum mentality in alt VMs. Like the vibes are right. I like the people there. They're very smart, but very high caliber, but also very kind and generous with their time. And those are kind of the people that I want to surround myself with. And so going to them, forming partnerships, building with them side by side, providing feedback bidirectionally is kind of how we see us, going to market and being the only bridge for AltVMs. And so to answer your question, it was actually quite easy, right? It seems daunting, especially for Solana, right? Solana's obviously has received a lot of attention now, but so for some of these smaller, more nascent ecosystems, it's been pretty effortless, I would say.
So that makes sense. I feel there's like this new energy in some of the new ecosystems that are forming up because they have this different worldview of the crypto world, right? Like they want to change something, and that's why they're building something of their own.
Yeah.
So I definitely relate to the fact that there's this new energy that you can see it even on Twitter, right? Like there's a new perspective, new focus toward application development, how things should happen. So yeah, I feel like something interesting is going on, and it's great that you guys are also now trying to be a part of that.
Yeah. I think when you're energized to like have like the tide raise all boats and you're like energized to be a part of that mission, that just makes work like incredibly easy. And I've frankly not felt that on Ethereum for the past 6 to 12 months.
But that's like you previously worked at Aave, right? Which is one of the core Ethereum products. So coming from you, this feels a little odd. Not odd, but just surprising.
I think what I liked about Ethereum a few years ago was that it still had that mentality. Um, and it has changed for reasons that I need to reflect longer on and can't articulate right now.
Makes sense. I mean, that's
Yeah.
all good. Uh,
Yeah. And
but yeah,
it's, I don't know, 2019, 2020 Ethereum just feels, completely different than it feels right now. Obviously, more people have come and the pie is much bigger now. And I want to revisit that, right? I don't think it's really any different than, let's say you work at Facebook and you were employee 150, which is, big in crypto, but was small in Facebook at the time. And then, a year later, it's almost at 600, right? It's like new faces, feels more PvP. You feel kind of disintermediated from the vision, and the core culture of it has kind of diluted. And I'm searching for that, Series A seed stage tech company again.
again, that's a good framework, and I feel like it's kind of looked down upon that okay, some project is moving away from the Ethereum ecosystem to now build in another ecosystem. But I feel that's the natural course of things, right? A lot of people that I've talked to, like they joined crypto because of Bitcoin, but then they saw Ethereum and they were just like energized by the idea of smart contracts and the fact that apps can now live on chain, so they migrated to Ethereum. So now, of course, natural course of things, there are newer applications or like the newer ways of building, and it's only logical that builders would move there and try to like do their own thing again.
Yeah, definitely. It's like, you cut your teeth and you've seen something grow and you kind of want to have new pastures and a new kind of design space to experiment with.
Awesome. I feel like I now have a much better understanding of like your reasons behind the move. So thanks a lot for going into that. Just as a final comment on like what's your ambition and goal for Catalyst, and like where do you see Catalyst 2 3 years from now? Like what's the ideal scenario?
So I think the big change with Catalyst that I want to continue seeing through is that we now believe in something, right? Sure, like 2 years ago, we believed in the modular blockchain thesis. We believed in a world of thousands of chains. I still believe that to be true, but it's become, consensus, I would say. Whereas this is still, I think, non-consensus, and we still feel very strongly about it. Um, you know, we, we still believe in the modular thesis, and I think it ties very complementary to the AltVM kind of bull thesis. Um, but again, we believe in something, and Akram from Celestia said it best: like you measure how well you're doing as a brand by how many haters you have, right? And we have a small but growing amount of people that disagree with our decision on a number of different fronts. And so that's something that we want to see through. Like I believe in this super strongly. My co-founder Alexander does as well, and so we want to push that as far as we can. And so for what Catalyst looks like in 2 3 years, cannot be disintermediated with what AltVMs look like in 2 3 years, right? with Catalyst effectively facilitating Catalyst underneath, right? Facilitating kind of the economy there. And so we're seeing move chains and SVM chains really kind of be at the same level as Ethereum and its rollups in terms of activity, in terms of users, although some of these chains have more users than Ethereum based on how you measure it right now, in terms of TVL, in terms of apps. And we're basically facilitating that, right? And I want to see step function apps. I want to see some really, really cool things. I asked on Twitter a couple of weeks ago, what can be built on Move that can't be built on EVM? Rushi had this really great response that got me incredibly excited, right? It was things like very performant prediction markets, right? That are like mobile friendly, DePIN networks, social experiences, consumer experiences, fully on-chain games that take advantage of the parallel execution of Move, right? Very secure applications that take advantage of native formal verification of Move and other kind of security properties that it's solved for, right? And that got me really excited, right? I think, sorry, there's a bit of a side, but one thing that I've been disappointed about Ethereum is that all of the rollups are the copycats of mainnet, right? And I get it. You want like pure equivalency for very easy developer migration, right? But I think we've hit the point where I couldn't even name you one team that's purely building on mainnet. And so they're comfortable with building on rollups. And now is the time to add additional things, be EVM plus, right? Like add EIPs that you love to see on the base layer, add native account abstraction, which zk-SIG has done. So props to them. And actually coordinate, right? Do a little bit of coordination. Like all the major rollups should have coordinated for, native interop, but now we have this like intra cluster rollup kind of thing going on that's going to be confusing. Account abstraction, like additional EIPs, like new precompiles that are ZK friendly, like things like that, right? And that has not happened, which is disappointing for me. And so I like to look at new pastures. I like to look at teams that have thought about this from the ground up and really elevate the developer experience as an app builder myself. And that just makes things a lot easier, in my opinion.
Got it. Makes sense. I think I relate and agree to a lot of it, but I also feel like some of these problems will be addressed now because it has kind of gone too far, right? Like there's too much fragmentation at this point, and even Vitalik is in wartime mode now. Now he's writing blog post after blog post,
Yeah.
and there's a clear shift towards just getting something done and just improving the UX, right? Like I feel like some of the UX improvements that Intense kind of brought about has made people realize that speed does matter, and just allowing users to move from one chain to another quickly does matter. And I feel like in the future, Ethereum will also have some of these EIPs that come through and just better connectivity across the entire EVM. So I'm still hopeful and bullish on that, but I really agree with your the crux of your answer in the beginning, where you guys have found your new purpose, right? Like you believe in something now, and sometimes that's literally all you need, like a thesis that you can now build towards, and then slowly things just like start moving in the right direction.
Yeah, I agree. Not to like hammer this Ethereum point too much, so I'll keep it really brief and then shut up forever about it. But I think the same sentiment was felt from Cosmos, right? It's like every chain should be on the latest version of Cosmos SDK. It should have the latest IBC modules to take advantage of all these like increases in UX that we see on transfers and on the build chains. But it becomes a coordination issue, right? Where like all these chains, some of them don't want to upgrade because these features really aren't that pertinent to them. Same with like the IBC module example. And I fear that's going to happen in Ethereum as well. I've tweeted a number of times on how I feel like Ethereum is running the same kind of woes or playbook that Cosmos has run, where you have rollups that are saying, no, thank you, I don't want this new intense EIP. Sorry, intent builders, figure it out, right? Or like, no, thank you, I don't want, I don't even want to harmonize my native bridge implementations, right? Like every rollup native bridge looks slightly different, which is really frustrating for a cross-chain builder. And what I'm cautiously optimistic about is that is a stronger social coordination layer on Ethereum. You have Vitalik, you have the EF and Alcor devs, you have even like other major voices like Sriram and other restaking projects. And so I am cautiously optimistic, but again, incentives and coordination are kind of like the devil in crypto.
Yeah, I mean, it's totally possible, right? Like after a point, maybe some of these teams are big enough that they become opinionated about how Ethereum should scale or what the future looks like, and just decide not to participate, right? Like I totally see that possibility as well. Um, but yeah, that's maybe a different discussion. And I really appreciate your honest thoughts on all of these points. And I'm really excited that someone is finally building the rails for like the other part of crypto, right? Like just growing the ecosystem in different ways and not just focusing on the EVM. So I'm really happy to see you guys do that. And like I feel like at LI.F we also have the same thesis, just connecting ecosystems where there is demand, like wherever users want to go, just connect those, right? So totally back that move as well, and wish you the best.
Yeah, thank you. Like we see our role as like we're team players in this like chain abstraction narrative, right? So like LeFi is, I think, the best position to take advantage of, chain abstraction with, the most connections of any project that I've personally seen in the space. I'm very close with the across team. I'm friendly with every other cross chain team, I like to think, uh, and we're just another player, right? It's like in basketball, you don't need a bunch of point guards, right? Like we're more than happy to be the center that's, blocking the shots and not scoring a lot of points. And that's kind of our mindset is we're going off. We're going to connect everything, the things that aren't connected, such that teams like LiFi can like make chain abstraction a reality, and we'll like support you guys every step of the way.
Likewise, I feel like all of us grow together, and that's the perfect mindset to have because yeah, that's just way more fun than building in isolation. So all support for you guys, and yeah, all the best for the future.
Cool, man. Thanks for having me on.